I welcome everyone today for the launch of our booklet, Joint Statements between the Catholic and Oriental Orthodox Churches, and for a time of introduction and questions, both about the booklet and about the Catholic-Oriental Orthodox Forum. I think the first thing we need to do there is simply to launch the booklet. So I'll invite Bishop Angaelos to stand next to me. Oops. And we'll hold this together. It'll give our friend here the opportunity to...
Does that look natural enough?
Yes.
You can't, but okay. The book is now officially launched. Anyway, you're very welcome, and I'm very grateful to all of you for coming here today. We are in the octave of prayer for Christian unity, and I think this is a very appropriate event to have during this time. We're here to, as I said a moment ago, to launch this booklet entitled Joint Statements between the Catholic and Oriental Orthodox Churches, and copies are available for you all today. And it's been produced by the Catholic-Oriental Orthodox Forum. What Bishop Angaelos and I would like to do together is to talk a little about the booklet and also about the forum which lies behind it. Perhaps I could begin by saying this. I worked, as some of you may know, for a number of years in the Pontifical Council for Christian Unity in Rome. And my particular responsibility was relations with the Anglican and Methodist churches, but my colleagues had responsibilities and briefs for other churches as well. And one in particular, Gerard Daucourt, now the Bishop of Nanterre, was the one responsible for our relations with the Oriental Orthodox churches. And he went for dialogues, for meetings to India, to the Malankar Syrian Orthodox churches there, and to Egypt, to the Coptic churches, and it was very much an ongoing thing at that time, and it continues still. And the background to it are a series of quite remarkable, I think, statements that perhaps not as well known as they might be. Pope Paul VI formulated agreed statements with both the Syrian Orthodox and the Coptic churches, and this was taken forward by Pope John Paul II and both Pope Shenouda and also Marzaki Iwas, the Patriarch of the Syrian Orthodox Church. And I think what's special about these documents is this, that whereas sometimes with other dialogues you have discussions that, if you like, work towards an eventual statement by the leadership of the churches, in the case of the relations with the Oriental Orthodox churches, we have things as a kick-start with very significant statements by the leadership, which said very significant things. We're talking about churches that have been separated for 1600 years, and the origins of the division are the differences about Christology in the early church, but which came to a head at the Council of Chalcedon in 451, after which there was a separation between the Western Church, the Byzantine churches, and the churches we now call the Oriental Orthodox churches. And what these statements do basically is to affirm that even though in the past there were differences, they are no longer they no longer justify the continued separation, and as a call to the churches to grow together and to try and to come into ever closer communion. Of course, they didn't establish ecclesial communion when churches have been separated for 1600 years. Differences in theology, spirituality, liturgy, and culture. But I think it kick-started a process which I would call a process of reception, of assimilation, of rapprochement, And when Bishop Angaelos and I met in about 2006, we decided to set up this forum with a view to taking forward that kind of agenda. Let me just read, to give a flavour of this, a bit from the joint statement of John Paul II and the Syriac Patriarch. The confusions and schisms that occurred between their churches in the later centuries, they realise today, in no way affect or touch the substance of their faith, since these arose not only because of differences in terminology and culture, and in the various formulae adopted by the different theological schools to express the same matter. Accordingly, we find today no real basis for the sad divisions and schisms that subsequently arose between us concerning the doctrine of the Incarnation. In words and life we confess the true doctrine concerning Christ our Lord, notwithstanding the differences in interpretation of such a doctrine which arose at the time of the Council of Chalcedon. So an affirmation that as regards the substance of faith in Jesus Christ, we have the same faith, although the expressions have been very different and led to all sorts of controversy. And as I said, these statements are as much as anything an invitation to reflect and to think more in terms of what we have in common than of what divides us. I think some people are very good at focusing very strongly at what divides, and there's an invitation here to think positively in terms of what we have in common. I think if someone reads these documents, which contain joint statements, but also the statement setting the agenda for the relaunched Catholic-Oriental Orthodox International Commission, we'll get a pretty good idea of what the issues are, what has been achieved, and what the issues are for the future. And I think, as I say, the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity is a good time to have this, because naturally for the Catholic community, when we think about the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity, naturally we think most immediately of the Anglican and the three churches, and this is a reminder that there is a global aspect to ecumenism, and particularly today with the Arab Spring and with the impact of those unfolding events for all the Christian churches in North Africa and the Middle East. It's a good time for us to recognise that there's an international dimension to ecumenism, and we all have a stake in it. We're all part of it. The Catholic Church is universal, and we all have a stake in the whole ecumenical operation. So I invite you, therefore, to take it, to read it, and to invite others to do the same. That's what I have to say by way of introduction for my part, and I invite Bishop Angaelos to speak now.
Thank you, Ernst. This is really a pleasure. It's a wonderful step. It is very unprecedented that a forum like this is established anywhere in the world. Although we have had the international discussions going on, and before I came here, I served as papal secretary in Egypt for 6 years, and I attended some of the discussions with the Roman Catholic Church and the Oriental churches there as an observer. And I really do think that these fora are a great place for us to start grassroots interaction and work on the ground. Of course, we don't aim here to duplicate the work of the international commissions, because that is their work. But what we do hope to do here is to speak about how we as churches here in the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland, how we work together and how we have a common witness. As His Eminence said, we have...
Yes, His Excellency.
Well, I'm just part of the ecumenical flavour. Doesn't apply then. I think it's very important for us to see how we can witness together. We get so tied up in theological discourse sometimes that we forget that the common life of Christianity we live today has a real implication on the ground. We're facing threats of increased secularism an increasing marginalization of religion in general and Christianity in particular. And I think being members of first century churches, we really do need to both live and also introduce to people the wealth and meaning and value of what it is to witness and live our Christianity today. And it's very easy to become quite theoretical and academic about theology and forget that it is really the faith that we are talking about. We're talking about our faith. We're talking about our faith in the presence of God, in the incarnate Word, in salvation, in a God who is really, as we believe, the creator of all, and also the solution to most of the things that are happening today. If we look anywhere in the world, we see all of these conflicts, and we see so many things that need us to speak out. And while we're focusing constantly on our divisions, we forget to speak in communion on what we can have in common. I remember a few years ago when there was the issue of gay adoption. We as Oriental Orthodox churches sent a letter supporting the Archbishop of Westminster at the time, because we have a common stance on this. Likewise, with many other things where we can really stand side by side and shoulder to shoulder and say that this is what we believe. Of course, we have differences, and those differences are not going to be resolved today, or may indeed not be resolved for a long time. But we need to work towards the understanding that these differences will be resolved one day. Our Lord Jesus Christ makes a very, very clear promise of one flock and one shepherd. He is going to be the shepherd of that flock, and we're all going to be that unified flock together. As Archbishop Kevin said, this forum really started out of friendship. After a cup of tea that we had at Southwark at the time, in the Archdiocese, and we decided that that interaction should then be broadened. And when I took these thoughts back to the Council of Oriental Orthodox Churches, everyone was very welcoming. So there is a great acceptance of the fact that we have a lot in common. I know it's cliche, and please excuse me if I do say it, but what we do have in common far, far outweighs what separates us. And I think it's time we need to focus on that. This statement, this book then, what it does is it projects the foundation of that thought. It's very easy in the ecumenical life we lead today, for us to make wonderful statements of how close we are together and how divisions will never separate us in our common witness. But seeing this book and seeing that it is built on foundations not only at our own personal level here, but at the level of the leadership of our churches over decades, shows us we're actually building this on very solid ground. What we hope to do through the forum, as I was saying, is not to duplicate the theological discussions, but to actually see what we can do on the ground here. How we can speak, especially at a year like this, where we have Her Majesty's Jubilee, we have the Olympic Games, we have so much happening in the Middle East, we have so much happening here in our own country. And there needs to be a very clear Christian voice out there, not to marginalize, but to express the depth of our conviction and our very real faith in the fact that there is a solution to all of this. We're not politicians, and I don't think we aim to just make friends at the cost of the truth. But at the same time, we are not aggressive, and we do not intend to make enemies either. But it is a very clear balance of expressing the gospel truth as we hold it, and to be able to portray that in a very lived sense. It's very well for us to stand at our pulpits and speak and preach love, But if our faithful do not see our churches working together, they see this as being quite hypocritical. And so if we as church leadership, as priests and pastors and shepherds in the church can't actually portray this, if we can't have this relationship and the wider relationship in this room and indeed between our churches in this land that we live in, then we find it very difficult to stand and preach love and forgiveness and acceptance. So I'm very, very happy to be part of this launch. I believe in ecumenism. I wear so many different hats that it makes my head spin sometimes. And it's not because I like the tea and biscuits and acronyms. It is because I really believe in it. I believe in the one body of Christ, a fragmented body at the moment, but a body that will be whole one day according to the promise. And if we can have take one very small step together through this forum and through a publication like this, and we have plans to do a lot more, then I pray that this step really becomes relevant. I also want to thank in particular Father Peter Farrington, who put a lot of work into this book, and we're very thankful to him as Oriental Council, and I'm sure the Archbishop will agree with me on behalf of the forum as well, to thank him for all his hard work and his dedication, and I thank you all for being here.
Does anybody have any questions?
I guess my first question is, who's going to be reading this book, and how do the messages that you are trying to put across today affect the ordinary Catholic and the ordinary Coptic Christian that maybe meet in the street?
Well, can I say the first thing? First thing you notice about this book is it's not very long. And also it's divided into different sections. There are the different joint statements by the Pope and the leadership of the Syrian, Coptic and the Armenian churches. So I think it's I don't think it's a difficult book to access for someone who is interested. And I think the thing about this book is it does put you in the picture. Taken together with what Bishop Angaelos and I have said, it does put people in the picture about the state of relations. I think I would regard it as somewhat similar to the Little Orange volume, which is very familiar to Catholic ecumenisms, which contained the first statements of Archbishop of the Anglican Roman Catholic International Commission about Eucharist ministry and authority, which became, I think, for those interested in ecumenism, very important documents, because common articulations were contained about these matters. The reason why we're having this meeting is to, if you like, so that people who are disposed, are interested in ecumenism, and are open will know about it and be encouraged to pick it up and read it. I suppose we're looking at those people who do have a sense, in the way Bishop Angaelos very, very beautifully outlined, of the importance of the ecumenical movement. I'd like to think it will be nourishment for them, and that the number of those people will increase. That's my.
I'm hoping it'll have a very broad readership. The fact that it is quite small and straight to the point, and the fact that the language used is actually it's not so difficult. It's not very deep theological language in which people can be lost. I'm hoping that the media will look at it, and thankful for your presence today, and start to maybe portray the fact that there is a unity in all of this. It's not just about meetings. The second group I would hope was people who are studying theology, because although we have this spirit amongst us, not everyone coming out of a theological institution has the same sort of understanding. And I think depending on the institution you're in, you will come out with a certain angle of what the current relations are. And to have something like this that is actually agreed to by the Catholic Church and Oriental Orthodox churches means that this is our position, and means that people are able to make use of it. Also, I think to just people who are interested, people who are just interested, people who may hear about this hear about this launch, or people who may read about it and say, well, I'd like to know. Then even if a small part of their mind starts to understand that there is real unity and there is a real foundation, I think it'll make a difference.
Just to add one final thing to that, I mentioned when I worked in Rome, my colleagues, I had colleagues who were involved directly in this work. When I came back to England, it was obvious both from conversations and things that one saw in the press that a lot of people either don't know or have a mistaken view of the nature of the relationship and of the key historical events. And I hope that it'll have an educational sort of purpose in that sense.
Abigail Feynman, the tablet. I'm no expert on Orthodox matters, but I was wondering if you could define for us the Oriental Orthodox churches, as opposed to, I know that in Britain we've got some presence of the Russian Orthodox, and generally I know that there are, there's long technical words, but autocephalous and self-governing bodies, I wonder if you could explain sort of how the Oriental Orthodox churches fit into the kind of bigger Orthodox picture, please. And also, maybe a question for Archbishop McDonald. Was one of the impetuses behind this initiative because dialogue with the Anglicans is getting more complicated because of the kind of developments going on within the Anglican community in the last few years?
Yeah.
On the Orthodox front, trying to summarize Orthodoxy in a couple of sentences is going to be very challenging for anyone. There are two families of Orthodoxy. There's the Oriental Orthodox family, and that is the Coptic Orthodox Church, Armenian Orthodox Church, Syrian Orthodox Church, Eritrean Orthodox Church, Indian Orthodox Church, and Ethiopian Orthodox Church. So those are the six Oriental churches. On the Eastern Orthodox side, that is then the Byzantine Orthodox, so that would be the Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, and the Eastern European Orthodox churches. There are in total 14 or 15 of the Eastern Orthodox churches now. The relationship between us is that there was, let's call it a misunderstanding, on the nature of Christ. And so historically the Oriental Orthodox churches were called Monophysite, believing in only one nature of Christ, although our churches have actually constantly defended both the divinity and the humanity of Christ in one composite nature, which is, as St. Cyril put it, the incarnate word. So we've never denied either of those. But we're talking about one nature that has both of those natures indivisibly within it. We're working at that level as well. We've got an international commission that has come a long way in the past 20 years. We have a preliminary agreement on the nature of Christ, Christology, and we're just waiting for the churches to sign off on it. And the next step, hopefully, is that we can resolve this.
Yeah. The answer to the question you addressed specifically to me is no. The dialogue with the Anglican Church has its own significance and its own importance, and does continue and must continue. But the point I was making earlier is it's important that Catholics should also feel part of the outreach of the Catholic Church universally to the Eastern churches. Both in the documents of the Council and in subsequent church teaching, there are three, if you like, main areas. of ecumenical outreach. The ancient Oriental churches, which Bishop Angaelos has just identified, what we call the Eastern Orthodox churches, which is, as you said yourself, is all the autocephalous Byzantine churches. And thirdly, the churches and ecclesiastical communities of the Reformation. The break with the division with the Oriental Orthodox churches is the oldest, going back to 451. The Eastern Orthodox churches, the date we usually identify as 1054, the mutual anathemas. But of course, both before and after those dates, there's a process of, if you like, distancing, and I think the Catholic Church at the universal level is engaged in all of those things. Of course, but the Eastern Orthodox has its own particular story, and it's had its own particular difficulties. But I think the early documents of that dialogue are extremely important. And the key thing, of course, Bishop Angaelos said about what we have in common is more important, is the affirmation of the same sacraments, including crucially the sacrament of order. That is shared. We're not at the point of full ecclesial communion, so we can't have concelebration. We're still there are still a long way to go before that. But the fact that we have the affirmation that a recognition of each other's sacraments and orders is a huge thing we have in common, and there's the imperative to work to consolidate, and I think a lot of it's to do with at a cultural level. Bishop Angaelos talked about friendship, about people coming together and developing a greater sense of what we have in common. It's a complex cultural, sociological, and historical process, not just theological.
I add also that in a similar way, we, as Oriental churches here in the United Kingdom, also have a similar forum with the Anglican Communion, Church of England. And that was actually probably a springboard towards this, because we use the same model. But then, to show you how dynamically this works, because we had learned so much from the fluid nature of that dialogue, we actually put a series of aims and objectives that you will find at the beginning of the book. And because they had been thought about so well, we then took those aims and objectives and applied them to the Anglican forum as well. So they've fed into each other. And just one further point on my first answer about the Orthodox churches, I just wanted to clarify that here in the United Kingdom, we have very good relations with the Eastern churches, and we have a regular encounter with them, and we're hoping in the near future we'll be having conversations with the leadership of the Eastern Orthodox churches to have a unified service of sorts, so we can come together.
Can I ask a question, please? This is on the issue of reception. One of the things that seems to have gone wrong with the Anglican Catholic dialogues was that when the matter went out to the wider churches, the understandings that had been agreed were not perceived as representing the faithful's view of their own churches. It seems to me that if ecumenism is to be serious, there must be an involvement of lay people, if you like, the ordinary Christian. And I wondered if in this ongoing and forward-moving understanding there is some involvement of lay people, there will be some involvement of lay people entirely to overcome that problem, or to seek to overcome that problem of people not recognizing their own churches in these agreed statements.
Yeah, I think that's a very helpful comment. Thank you for that. I think one of our hopes is that, well, going back to what you said, I think you're right. That perhaps one of the observations that made about the Catholic Anglican statements was that they claimed too much too soon. And I think one of the difficulties about ecumenical dialogue, really, because I was involved in that, is that when you're actually in a dialogue, it's not about compromise, it's about reaching deeply into the biblical and patristic roots of your faith in such a way that a convergence and a convergence in articulation of our faith today can be developed. The problem is, people who haven't been through that process, it's difficult for them to, when they read the document, say, well, this is not what how I understood it. But the purpose of disseminating, the publishing these statements is precisely for people to engage with the process at local level. My hope, and I think the hope of Bishop Angaelos, would be that by releasing this statement, there will, perhaps in some kind of informal way, it will be picked up by people. And I think the key thing from a Catholic point of view is here, we're not talking about the agreed statements of theologians that have yet to be ratified. We are talking about agreed statements to which the Catholic Church is committed in virtue of the fact that the Pope has made these statements together with the leadership of the Oriental Orthodox Church. So it's a rather different situation from with the Anglicans. But that I share your concern, actually, and that was helpful.
I think it's a very good point as well, and I think another way that we would have laity involved is very simply that we had a recent service, a day of prayer for Egypt, where Archbishop Kevin attended. We had a memorial service at Alexandria, Bishop Paul was there, and so for people to then see us standing together, and when we speak about the forum, we speak about our common work, where we make this book more available, then that will get people more involved. And then we've also spoken of potentially having some sort of prayer service where we can come together and pray and bring our faithful together. And it's those steps where these discussions become real and tangible that I think will bring people on board a lot more.
Is the Church of the East included in this Oriental Forum? Because they're more numerous now in Ealing than they are in Baghdad.
Do you want to answer that?
Well, no, the Oriental churches, as I said earlier, were those churches that are defined universally as members of the Oriental family.
So they're not included?
No.
I guess, yeah, following on from what you were saying about these suggested shared prayer gathering, do you have any either concrete proposals or things that you're hoping will be set up? Shared meals or cultural experiences, or a way to encourage holiday makers maybe to visit ancient Armenian monasteries, or are there kind of ideas that are going to get put down on paper somewhere?
Well, I think we have a consultant here who could be very useful. Those are very good ideas. Yeah, yes. I think.
If you want me to road test the holiday, that's fine.
we'll have to think about that. Well, you're right that we do have the, in a sense, our meetings are like that. And we got a little bit beyond the tea and biscuits. Some of them. I think what we're hoping for is that the word will get out a bit more, that it's okay and it's a good idea with your local people who belong to these churches to form friendships and to come together. Because very often I think people just need a bit of reassurance and a bit of indication that there is a lead on this, because a lot of the fact, I think what we have said between us today is probably simply not known. That's not through anybody's ill will, it's just because it's the way things happen. And I think if the word gets out to more people, that this is a relationship the church has officially, and it's okay and good, that it should be, that people will take initiatives. But I think, as Bishop Angaelos said, we're still, we've been separated for 1600 years, so we sort of, we have a sort of rather measured approach to this work, and the sort of things you mention are sort of things that we'll want to pursue in the future.
I think these are very much on the agenda, but as I said earlier, I think we really wanted this forum to be more than just us meeting twice a year to have a nice chat and then go away. We've been wanting to make sure that there's a very firm foundation, understanding of what we're there to do. So what we've been focused on, and if you imagine, we really, the first time we met was 2007, I think. So this is quite a young forum. What we've been trying to do is to get these aims and objectives clarified, so at least we know what we're doing there. Because you can imagine people around that table, not people who are going to go and waste their time. So I'm sure many of you will know that if you go to a meeting like that, you will sometimes go out of politeness, but you will never be totally dedicated if things aren't clear, and it won't be effective. So we've been focusing on that, and the next step was, now that we know what we're doing, let's get it out to people what we're about. So now it's informing people. The next step, I think, will be the engagement and how we do that. And I think that there are a few things that will happen relatively short.
Maybe chance for perhaps one more question, if anybody would like to. Well, I think in that case.
Can I just read one excerpt?
You do. Well,
just to show you the timelessness of theological dialogue and indeed human politics. This is at the end of the agreement between the late Pope Paul VI and His Holiness Pope Shenouda III in 1973. See if this sounds familiar. As we rejoice in the Lord who has granted us the blessings of this meeting, then he goes on, we earnestly desire to look for a solution for the Middle East crisis, so that true people with justice should prevail, especially in the lands hallowed by the preaching, death, and resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ, and by the life of the Blessed Virgin Mary. So not really much has changed in 40 years. We're still trying to work in our unity, and the Middle East still needs our prayers.
Thank you very much for coming. It's much appreciated.
Thank you.
I think we
and we also thank the Catholic Bishops' Conference for hosting this event here and being so gracious and accepting us here. So thank you very much.